The lunch rush had just ended, leaving the restaurant filled with the soft clatter of dishes and the smell of warm bread lingering in the air. Marcus wiped down a table near the front window, humming quietly a tune his daughter always sang in the mornings. His shoulders finally relaxed for the first time that day. But then the door slammed open so violently that the bell above it trembled. A woman stumbled inside, almost falling. Her yellow dress, bright enough to catch the eye of every customer, was torn slightly at the hem. Her hair disheveled like she had been running for blocks. Her wide blue eyes darted around the room, desperate, terrified, looking for anyone who didn't want to hurt her. When her gaze landed on Marcus, she didn't hesitate. She rushed straight to him, grabbing his arm with both hands, her fingers cold and trembling. Please help me," she gasped, voice cracking as though she hadn't breathed in minutes. "They'll kill me." For a moment, Marcus froze, not in fear, but in recognition. He'd seen this expression before, years ago, in places where danger didn't wait for permission. He felt the shift inside himself instantly, the quiet dropping away as his instincts sharpened. His posture changed, subtly but totally. Customers noticed too. Conversations died mid-sentence. He gently steadied her with one large hand on her back, lowering his head so she wouldn't have to force her voice. "You're safe. I've got you," he said, calm but firm, like he was anchoring her to the ground. Her breath hitched, and she clung to him tighter, as if letting go meant being dragged back into whatever nightmare she'd escaped from. Marcus didn't pull away. His body automatically shifted so he was between her and the door, eyes flicking to the glass. The street outside looked normal, cars rolling by, sunlight bouncing off the sidewalk till he noticed the shapes moving with purpose. For men, dressed in dark shirts and hard expressions, walking fast, too fast, and all of them heading toward the restaurant. Marcus felt the familiar current of danger rise in his chest, a sensation he thought he had buried deep. He swallowed hard, not out of fear for himself, but for the woman shaking against him. "Stay behind me," he murmured, her fingers tightened. And in a cracked whisper, she said again, "Please don't let them take me." And without questioning why or how, Marcus knew he wouldn't. Elena tried to speak, but the words tangled with panic, coming out in broken fragments. Marcus guided her gently toward the counter, keeping her shielded behind his body while his eyes stayed locked on the figures approaching outside. Her breath shook against his shoulder, and when she finally managed to talk, her voice was so soft he had to lean closer to hear her. They took him," she whispered. He's a CEO. They kidnapped him. I escaped. But they think I know where he hid the money, hundreds of millions." Her hands fluttered helplessly at her sides before grabbing onto Marcus's shirt again, as though grounding herself in something solid. "They said if I screamed, if I ran, they'd finish him first." Marcus listened, but he didn't let emotion touch his expression. Years of discipline kept his features steady. Still, something under his ribs twisted. Not sympathy, something deeper. A memory of nights spent protecting people he barely knew, of decisions made in the dark long before he became a father and traded danger for stability. He didn't ask unnecessary questions. He didn't tell her to calm down. He didn't doubt her story, not even for a second. The fear in her eyes was too raw to be fabricated. She tried to continue. "They followed me from the alley. I didn't know where else to go. I just kept running until I saw you." Her gaze lifted to his face, searching for any sign he might push her away. Instead, she found eyes steady and quiet strength she hadn't expected in a restaurant waiter wearing an apron and carrying the weight of exhaustion on his shoulders. Marcus slowly positioned himself so he could see both her and the door, his stance widening just slightly. The subtle shift made her notice something she hadn't before. The way he moved wasn't casual. It was precise, controlled, like someone trained to expect the unexpected. "You did good running in here," Marcus said quietly, his voice low but sure. "You're safe for now. They won't get to you." Elena shook her head, tears threatening. "You don't understand. These men, they're not like normal criminals. They're organized, dangerous. If they find me," Marcus cut her off, gently but firmly, "they're not taking you anywhere." His tone carried a finality that made her heart slow. Just a little. For the first time since she burst into the restaurant, Elena felt a fragile sense of safety because Marcus wasn't reacting like everyone else had, with fear or confusion. He moved like someone who had lived through danger and learned not to flinch from it. She swallowed and whispered, "Why are you helping me?" Marcus didn't look at her when he answered. His eyes stayed fixed on the shadows moving closer on the sidewalk. His jaw tightened, and a hint of something unresolved flickered across his face. "No one should face fear alone," he said softly, and just as he finished speaking, the first of the 4 men reached the door. The restaurant door swung open with a sharp chime that felt nothing like the gentle ring it usually made. Every conversation, every fork scraping a plate, every laugh instantly evaporated. The air tightened. Customers turned stiffly, their eyes widening as the 4 men in black shirts entered like a shadow. Swallowing the light behind them, they didn't bother pretending to be subtle. Their strides were confident, entitled, and predatory-like. They already believed they owned the room. The leader, a tall man with a shaved head and a scar running from his eyebrow to his jaw, scanned the restaurant with a slow, cold sweep. When his gaze locked on Elena, he smiled not warm, not amused, but victorious, as though she were prey that had wandered back into the cage on her own. Elena's breath caught. Marcus felt her flinch behind him, her fingers clutching the fabric of his shirt. He didn't move away. If anything, he shifted even closer to her, becoming a wall between her and the danger flooding the doorway. The leader took 2 steps forward. "We're not here to cause a scene," he said in a mockingly polite tone. The lie was thick enough for everyone to hear. "Just hand her over, and no one gets hurt." Marcus didn't answer immediately. He stood still as stone, eyes unreadable. His silence made the leader's smirk falter. "Hey," the man snapped, trying again. "You, waiter, step aside." Marcus looked at him, then really looked hand. Something in his gaze made the man hesitate. The room didn't know it, but Marcus had already mapped every angle, the distance to the tables, the weight shifts of the men, the exit paths, the potential threats. His mind had switched to that mode effortlessly, disturbingly easy considering how long he'd tried to suppress it. "Leave," Marcus said simply. The leader blinked, then laughed. A short, ugly sound. "This isn't your business." Marcus's jaw clenched. Behind him, he felt Elena, trembling harder now that the men were close enough to touch her if they reached around him. He sensed her fear like heat against his back, feeding something deep in him, an old instinct he'd buried after becoming a father. One of the other men stepped forward, puffing his chest. "Move," he ordered. Marcus didn't move. Instead, he shifted his weight slightly, grounding his feet. The subtle adjustment was invisible to most, but the leader felt something was off. His smirk faded into suspicion. "You don't want to do this," he said quietly. Tension rising, Marcus spoke in the same low, steady tone he used moments before when he calmed Elena. "You're done here," the leader snarled, patience evaporating. "Don't be a hero. Just give her to us." Marcus felt Elena pressed closer, her breath catching as if she expected him to step aside like anyone else would. But Marcus had spent too many years fighting battles he didn't choose, protecting people who had no shield except him. And even though he was just a waiter now, even though he had tried to build a life far away from all of this lines, he could never unlearn. He squared his shoulders and said, more firmly this time, "No." The room seemed to hold its breath. The men exchanged looks, irritated, surprised that a stranger in an apron dared challenge them. Then the first man lunged, and Marcus moved, not like a waiter reacting to danger, but like someone trained for it, like someone who had once been far more dangerous than any of them. Elena realized it in that instant. She wasn't standing behind a waiter, she was standing behind a fighter, a protector, someone with a history written in scars she couldn't see, and he had just decided to become her shield. The first attacker lunged with the confidence of someone who had never been stopped before. His arm shot forward, aiming to grab Marcus by the collar and yank him aside like he was nothing more than an obstacle in the doorway. But Marcus wasn't there when the hand reached for him. He pivoted in a swift, fluid motion that seemed too quick for a man of his size, catching the attacker's wrist mid-air. There was no hesitation. Marcus twisted sharply, controlling the man's momentum. A crack echoed, not a break, but the kind of joint pop that forces a body to collapse, whether it wants to or not. The man dropped to one knee, gasping, his face contorted in shock. The restaurant erupted. Chairs scraped the floor. A woman screamed. Someone ducked behind a table. But amid the chaos, Marcus's breathing remained steady, his eyes sharp, his stance grounded. This wasn't panic. This was muscle memory. Another attacker charged from the right, hoping to catch Marcus while he was occupied. He threw a wide punch meant to knock Marcus off his feet. Marcus shifted sideways, the movement precise, economical like water flowing around a rock. He caught the man's forearm, redirected the force, and slammed his elbow into the attacker's ribs. A hollow thud followed, and the man staggered back, wheezing, unable to draw in air. Elena watched in stunned disbelief, her trembling replaced by awe and a dawning realization. Marcus wasn't just defending her, he was dismantling trained men as if he were reacting to a routine drill. The apron around his waist fluttered as he moved, a surreal reminder of the double life he must have once lived. The third man tried a different tactic, rushing Marcus from behind. A customer tried to warn him, shouting, "Behind you." But Marcus didn't need the warning. He sensed it, the shift in air, the footsteps, the angle of attack. He ducked low, sweeping his leg in a tight arc that knocked the attacker's feet out from under him. The man crashed onto a table, splintering it, sending plates scattering across the floor. The leader, the man with the scar, stepped forward now, his confidence shaken. His smirk was gone. His eyes narrowed, recalibrating his understanding of the man standing before him. "You're not a waiter," he muttered. Marcus didn't respond. He lifted his hands into a stance that didn't belong in any restaurant, elbows in, chin down, weight balanced. A stance that belonged to a fighter, a protector, a man who had walked through violence before and learned how to survive it. Elena's heart hammered as she watched him, a mix of fear and admiration pulsing through her. She had grabbed the arm of a stranger for safety, but fate had led her to someone far more than that. Someone who moved like he had once been trained by the best or hardened by the worst. The leader lunged at Marcus, more desperate than confident now. Their arms collided. Marcus blocked, redirected, and countered with such precision that the leader stumbled backward, clutching his jaw. The other two attackers, who were still conscious, hesitated, exchanging glances. They had walked in, expecting an easy retrieval. A frightened woman, a powerless waiter, a simple job. But instead, they'd stepped into the path of a man who fought like a ghost from a past he never wanted to revisit. Marcus didn't taunt them. He didn't shout. He simply stood there, chest rising and falling with calm breaths, his protective stance unbroken. Behind him, Elena realized something powerful. For the first time since she'd escaped her captors, she wasn't afraid. Marcus had become a shield she hadn't expected Dan to force the men had never prepared for. And as the attackers regrouped, eyes narrowing with new caution, everyone in the restaurant understood one thing clearly. Marcus was only just getting started. The restaurant had fallen silent except for the ragged breaths of the injured men on the floor. Glasses still trembled on tables from the impact of bodies crashing into them. Marcus didn't wait for the shock to settle or for the customers to recover their voices. His focus tunneled instantly to the window, where the black SUV still idled at the curb like a silent threat. Inside it, through the tinted glass, he could make out the faint silhouette of a man slumped against the back seat. Lena's fiancé. His posture screamed danger, wrists bound, head lowered, barely moving. Marcus's stomach clenched. If the attackers were retreating, they weren't running away, they were running back to finish their job. As the last two conscious attackers darted out of the restaurant, Marcus moved. He didn't think. He didn't hesitate. He simply ran. Elena stumbled forward with a gasp, reaching out instinctively. Marcus waited, but he was already out the door, sprinting into the bright afternoon. Sunlight hit him hard, outlining his body in a sharp silhouette as he crossed the sidewalk. The attackers reached the SUV first. One yanked open the rear door, while the other barked something to the driver, something tense and hurried. They planned to take off, take Elena's fiancé with them, and disappear before anyone could intervene. But Marcus wasn't letting them get another second. He skidded to a stop in front of the SUV, planting himself between the kidnappers and their escape. His chest lifted with steady breaths, his eyes narrowed with purpose. He stood like a barricade, solid, unmovable, unbreakable. The attackers froze, disbelief spreading across their faces. They hadn't expected him to follow. They definitely hadn't expected him to fight on open pavement under the sun. The driver cursed under his breath. One of the men drew a small blade from his pocket, flicking it open in a fluid motion. "Move," he growled. "This doesn't concern you." Marcus didn't back up. If anything, he stepped closer. "You chose the wrong woman to chase," he said, his voice low, unwavering, carrying a dangerous promise. The knife-wielding man hesitated, thrown off by Marcus's calm tone. But desperation made people reckless. With a roar, he lunged forward, the blade glinting in the sunlight. Marcus reacted almost faster than the eye could follow. He sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's wrist mid-air, and twisted sharply. The blade slipped from the man's fingers before he even realized the fight had shifted. Marcus swept his leg behind the man's knee, sending him crashing to the ground. The second attacker ran at Marcus with a punch aimed at his temple. Marcus blocked it cleanly, absorbed the force, and countered by driving his elbow into the man's chest. The impact sent him back several steps, gasping for air. Elena, watching from the doorway of the restaurant, felt her hand fly to her mouth. Her heart hammered wildly, but not from fear, this time something else entirely. Something like disbelief at the man she had run to for safety. A man who moved not like a server, not like an ordinary citizen, but like someone who had lived through storms she could hardly imagine. Marcus glanced into the SUV just long enough to see the billionaire CEO's eyes open, slightly confused, dazed, but alive. Marcus's voice softened for just a second. "Hang on." Then his expression hardened again as he faced the attackers. The driver gunned the engine, tires screeching, prepared to run Marcus down if that's what it took. Marcus shifted his stance, ready, balanced. He stared down the vehicle with the same composure he had shown beneath the dim lights of the restaurant behind him. Elena whispered a shaky prayer. The sun reflected in Marcus's eyes as he braced himself not for himself, but for the man trapped inside that SUV, for the terrified woman watching him, and for the daughter waiting for him at home. He wasn't fighting out of rage. He was fighting out of purpose. He was fighting because someone needed him, because if he didn't stand here now, someone innocent would never see another sunrise. And Marcus had already lost too many people to ever let that happen again. Asterisk. The engine roared, the SUV lurching forward with a violent jerk that sent dust swirling across the pavement. The driver's intention was clear: if they couldn't escape with the billionaire, they'd mow Marcus down and take the body with them. But Marcus didn't flinch. His eyes tracked the wheels, the angle, the speed. His breath slowed. Time stretched thin. At the last possible second, he stepped to the side, letting the front bumper miss him by inches. With perfect timing born from a past he never spoke about, he slammed his palm against the driver's side window. The sudden distraction made the driver jerk the wheel, and the SUV screeched sideways, tires burning against asphalt. The moment the car's movement staggered, Marcus acted. He dove toward the open rear door, grabbed the CEO's arm, and yanked him out before the SUV could speed up again. The billionaire collapsed against Marcus's shoulder, weak and barely conscious. His lips were cracked, his breath thin. The ropes around his wrists had cut into his skin, dried blood staining his sleeves. "You're all right," Marcus murmured, lowering him gently onto the pavement. "Stay with me." But there was no time, because the two remaining attackers, dazed but desperate, charged again. One came at Marcus, swinging a metal rod he had grabbed from inside the SUV. Marcus raised his forearm, blocking the blow with a thud that vibrated through his bones. Pain shot up his arm, but he didn't let it break his focus. He shifted weight, drove his knee into the attacker's stomach, and followed with a punch so precise it snapped the man's head sideways. The attacker crumpled, the rod clattering to the ground. The second man, knife reclaimed, lunged with a furious scream. His movements were wild, sloppy, now-and-gar, replacing strategy. But Marcus's movements stayed sharp, disciplined. The blade sliced the air where his ribs had been a moment earlier. Marcus grabbed the man's wrist again, twisted, and drove his elbow into the attacker's temple. The man dropped instantly, unconscious before he hit the pavement. Elena finally reached the curb, her breath catching as she saw Marcus surrounded by fallen bodies, chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. He stood not as a man who won a fight, but as someone who had endured too many. For a second, She couldn't speak, she could only stare at him. At the strength he carried, at the fierceness he unleashed only when protecting others. Behind them, distant sirens grew louder, police rushing toward the chaos. Marcus turned back to the billionaire, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" he asked gently. The CAO's eyelids fluttered. He looked at Marcus with confusion, awe, and a hint of disbelief. You pulled me out," he rasped, the words fragile. "I thought they were going to kill me." Marcus nodded once, his voice low. "Not today." Elena knelt beside them, tears blurring her vision. Seeing them side by side, the billionaire her life was tied to, and the man who saved both of them, hit her with a wave of emotion she wasn't prepared for. Her hands shook as she touched her fiance's face, but her eyes drifted again and again to Marcus, as though she still couldn't understand how fate had brought him into her life at the exact moment she needed him most. The sirens grew closer, echoing against the buildings. But Marcus's mind wasn't on the approaching police or the crime scene that surrounded him. His thoughts flickered to his daughter, to the promise he had made to himself the day she was born. Never again would he let violence be part of his world. Yet here he was, standing in the middle of it because, when the moment came, he didn't hesitate. He couldn't. It wasn't in his nature to walk away from someone terrified, someone in danger, someone counting on him. He stared at his bruised knuckles, blood smearing his skin, and felt a quiet heaviness settle in his chest. He'd done what he had to, but the cost was another reminder of the life he couldn't fully escape. No matter how much he tried, Elena, voice trembling, whispered, "Marcus, you saved his life." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he lifted his eyes, meeting hers, and in that moment, she saw the truth. He wasn't a hero trying to surprise the world. He was a man who had been a protector long before she ever ran into his arms, and a man who would carry the weight of today long after the sirens faded. The police cars screeched to a halt, red and blue lights painting the pavement in frantic flashes. Officers rushed in, weapons drawn, voices commanding the attackers still conscious to stay down. Paramedics hurried toward the billionaire CEO, lifting him with careful hands. But the man didn't take his eyes off Marcus, not even as they strapped him onto a stretcher. "You," he whispered, breath thin. "You saved everything." His voice broke on the last word, as if the reality of how close he came to dying had only now sunk in. Marcus gave a small nod, eyes downcast. He didn't bask in gratitude. He didn't smile. He simply stepped back, wiping the drying blood from his knuckles with the edge of his apron. The adrenaline that had fueled him minutes ago slowly ebbed, leaving behind an old, familiar ache. Not physically, a heaviness he had carried before, one he had sworn never to feel again. Elena stood near the stretcher, torn between staying with her fiancé and walking toward the man who had saved them both. Her heartbeat thudded loudly in her chest, echoing the chaos she'd lived through, the fear she'd felt, and the unimaginable relief that now washed over her. She watched Marcus take one quiet step back, then another. He looked like he was slowly disappearing from the moment, folding into the background as though he didn't belong in the center of this story, even though he was the reason it wasn't a tragedy. "Marcus," she called softly. He stopped. His shoulders tightened, but he didn't turn at first. Only after a moment did he glance over, his expression calm yet guarded, as if bracing himself for something he didn't want to hear. Elena moved toward him, each step slow and careful. Officers walked around them, the street buzzing with noise, but for a moment, It felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of them. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk your life like that? For us? You didn't even know me." Marcus let out a breath that carried years of stories he'd never told. He looked past her, toward the paramedics working on her fiancé, then toward the restaurant he worked in, the place he'd chosen for its simplicity, its normalcy, its promise of peace. Then he looked back into her eyes. "Because nobody should face fear alone," he said softly. "And because—" his jaw flexed as he searched for the right words. "I've lost too much already. I won't stand by and watch someone else lose everything." His voice held a quiet pain, a depth she hadn't noticed until now. Something in her chest tightened at the realization. He wasn't fearless, he was simply someone who refused to let fear win. The CEO, now sitting upright on the stretcher, oxygen mask removed, gestured weakly toward Marcus. "At least, let me repay you," he said. "Money, a job, anything. You saved my life." Marcus shook his head immediately, almost instinctively. "I don't want anything." A faint smile tugged at the billionaire's lips. "People like you deserve the world." Marcus didn't agree or disagree. He simply stepped back again. "I just did what anyone should do." But Elena knew he was wrong. She had seen people run from danger all her life. She had seen people freeze, hide, look away. What Marcus did, standing between her and death without a second thought, that wasn't ordinary. It was extraordinary. As the CEO was loaded into the ambulance, Elena stepped closer to Marcus, her voice trembling. "Will we see you again?" For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes softened, the hardened lines of his expression easing. "Maybe," he said, "if life crosses our paths again." But she could sense the truth behind those words. He was already pulling back into the quiet life he'd built, the one he needed to protect for his daughter. He wasn't walking away because he didn't care. He was walking away because he cared too much, because he knew the cost of getting pulled back into a world he'd left behind. The police thanked him. Witnesses stared at him with awe. Yet Marcus quietly slipped out of the circle of flashing lights, turning down the street without fanfare. Elena stood there long after he was gone, her heart still racing, not from fear anymore, but from the imprint he'd left in her life. She had run into that restaurant in desperation, but she had run into a protector she never knew existed. And as Marcus disappeared around the corner, heading toward the school where his daughter would soon be waiting, the city seemed to breathe differently, safer, because somewhere out there, a man who never wanted to be a hero had proven he already was one.